St. Helena Shelter had once been a modest school building, its brick walls warm and full of life. Now it stood in a war-torn city, surrounded by crumbling apartments, shattered streets, and endless debris. Inside, 27 children, ranging from toddlers to teenagers, huddled together in the dim light of flickering lanterns. Their eyes were wide with fear, their small bodies trembling as distant explosions shook the ground. The shelter was run by Sister Maria, a resilient woman in her 50s with kind eyes and hands that had seen decades of hardship. Every day, she did her best to protect the children, feeding them thin soup, keeping them warm, and calming their nightmares. Her voice was gentle but firm, a beacon of hope amid chaos. "No matter how dark the world becomes, light will find us," she often reminded the children, trying to instill courage in their tiny hearts. Food and water were scarce. The city outside had been cut off for weeks, and aid trucks had become a rare sight. Sister Maria knew the militia groups were getting closer. Their patrols were growing bolder, and rumors of violence circulated like wildfire. Still, she refused to abandon her children, even when other aid workers fled in fear. One evening, just as the sun dipped behind the broken skyline, 10-year-old Elias spotted something unusual. Above the shelter, small white lights hovered and shimmered, moving gently as if floating on the wind. At first, he thought it was a reflection from the setting sun on distant dust clouds. But then he noticed the lights changing direction, circling above the roof, almost like they were watching. He whispered to Sister Maria, but she smiled softly and said it was probably nothing. Still, she couldn't shake the unease curling in her stomach. As night fell, the children tried to sleep, but the distant sounds of war made that impossible. Explosions echoed, and the occasional gunshot rattled the shelter's fragile windows. Sister Maria tiptoed through the darkened hallways, checking on each child. Their tiny forms pressed against one another in fear, whispering prayers of their own. Then, from the far side of the shelter, Elias tugged Sister Maria's sleeve. "Sister, I hear whispers," he said. "They're calling my name from above." Sister Maria's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea what he meant, but instinctively she stepped outside into the cold night air. Her eyes scanned the horizon. In the distance, faint silhouettes moved, armed men approaching. The children were in danger, and Sister Maria knew that tonight there would be no backup, no reinforcements, only faith and courage standing between them and the darkness. The night air was thick with tension as the militia moved toward St. Helena Shelter. Their boots crunched over shattered concrete, weapons glinting in the faint light. At the head of the group was Khalid Rahman, a ruthless commander notorious for striking without warning. His reputation for brutality was known even among his own men. Rumors said he had eliminated entire neighborhoods to assert control, and tonight his target was clear: the children inside the shelter. Inside, the children lay trembling, their blankets clutched tightly around them. Sister Maria moved quietly from one small body to another, whispering words of comfort. "Stay close, stay calm, trust that you are safe." Her voice was steady, though her hands shook slightly. Every muscle in her body was taut, alert to the slightest sound outside. Suddenly, Elias pointed upward, eyes wide. Above the shelter, soft white lights hovered, glowing against the night sky. At first, Sister Maria thought it was a trick of the moon or firelight from the distant ruins. But Elias insisted, "They're circling the shelter. I hear whispers calling our names." His voice quivered, half in fear, half in awe. Sister Maria's heart pounded. She had seen horrors before, but there was something different about these lights, a presence that felt protective, almost alive. She whispered a silent prayer and steadied herself. She knew the militia would be here any moment. Outside, Khalid raised a hand, signaling his men to surround the shelter. The militia fighters moved cautiously, scanning the shadows. Two guards stopped suddenly, pointing toward the sky. "Commander, lights above, I don't understand," Khalid dismissed them. "Ignore it, move forward." But a flicker of unease passed over his face. He didn't like surprises, especially ones he couldn't control. The closer they got, the more the lights seemed to grow in brightness, almost forming shapes, almost human. Inside, Sister Maria gathered the children in the center of the main hall. Their small hands clutched hers tightly. "Stay low, stay quiet, stay brave," she whispered, her voice firm despite the fear gnawing at her chest. The children nodded, too scared to speak, their eyes wide as shadows stretched along the walls. And then, without warning, the front door burst open and the militia stormed in, weapons raised. Khaled's cold eyes swept over the terrified children. He barked an order, his voice slicing through the silence. "Where are the journalists? Where are the reporters?" Sister Maria stepped forward, raising her arms. "There are no journalists," she said firmly. "Only children." Khaled's eyes narrowed. But just as he moved to signal his men, the white lights flared brighter than ever, illuminating the room. The militia froze, blinded and disoriented. The children screamed in fright, and in that moment something beyond explanation began to take shape. A glowing figure appeared, tall and radiant, standing protectively before them. The glowing figure hovered silently in the center of the shelter, its light warm yet blinding, casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. The children pressed themselves against Sister Maria, their faces pale but filled with awe. Elias stared wide-eyed at the figure, trembling but unable to look away. It seemed to radiate an unexplainable sense of calm, a protective presence that filled the room more strongly than any walls or locks could. The militia stumbled backward, shielding their eyes from the intense glow. Khaled Rahman, a man unaccustomed to fear, froze in disbelief. He shouted orders, but his voice sounded distant even to himself. His men faltered, tripping over debris, their weapons lowered as if some invisible force restrained them. Panic began to ripple through the group. The lights above the shelter intensified, spinning gently, forming shapes that resembled wings, like angels hovering over the children. Sister Maria, though shaking inside, felt a strange clarity wash over her. She whispered prayers aloud, and for the first time in weeks she felt hope rather than dread. "Protect these children, please," she murmured, her voice firm despite the chaos. The children echoed her prayers softly, their innocent voices blending with the hum of the radiant figure. One of the younger boys, barely 6 years old, pointed at the figure and whispered, "It's keeping them away, it's keeping them from touching us." Sister Maria nodded, tears streaming down her face. Somehow she knew it was true. Khaled's men panicked completely. Some dropped their rifles, others turned to run. But no matter which way they went, they seemed to be trapped within the glowing barrier. The militia commander tried to speak again, rage contorting his features, but his words faltered. Every attempt to move forward met an invisible force pushing them back. His soldiers began to question reality itself. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the light grew brighter one final time, illuminating every corner of the shelter. The sound of distant footsteps, reinforcements from the militia, echoed outside, but no one dared enter. The glowing figure, protective and unwavering, seemed to expand slightly, its light forming a shield that kept the children safe. And in that instant, the impossible became reality. The militia, armed and dangerous, were unable to harm a single child. Sister Maria felt a deep warmth, a certainty that they would survive the night. The children huddled closer, watching the miraculous figure, whispering prayers of gratitude, their fear slowly melting into wonder. For the first time since the war had begun, hope had entered the walls of St. Helena Shelter, and it was alive. Outside St. Helena Shelter, the war-torn streets were filled with the chaos of distant explosions and scattered debris. But near the shelter itself, something impossible had taken hold. The militia, armed and trained for fear, had never encountered anything like this. Their commander, Khaled Rahman, shouted and waved his rifle, trying to regain control, but every movement seemed futile. Invisible hands, or perhaps the will of something far greater, kept them from advancing. Their boots slipped on imaginary barriers, their rifles refused to aim straight, and a sudden chill made their fingers stiff and unresponsive. From inside the shelter, Sister Maria could see the confusion through the shattered windows. She gathered the children tightly, whispering, "Do not be afraid, trust in the protection around you." The children's eyes were wide, reflecting the radiant light that had become a shield around their small bodies. Their whispers of prayers seemed to add to the power in the room, their faith and innocence amplifying the miraculous presence. Khaled's men began to panic. One soldier turned to flee and tripped, knocking over a crate of rubble that blocked the entrance completely. Another cried out in fear, claiming he saw figures moving in the light, tall silhouettes that seemed to glide just above the ground. Khalid's rage turned to confusion and finally to terror. He realized this wasn't human resistance. Something else was at work, something beyond comprehension. The commander finally blew a whistle for retreat, but the order was barely heard over the sound of his own racing heartbeat. His men scrambled, running in all directions, stumbling over debris, trying to escape the impossible force that barred them. Every attempt to come closer to the shelter was met with resistance, as though the air itself had thickened around them. Inside, the children clung to Sister Maria, but slowly, hope began to replace fear. They began to whisper their names aloud as though the angels could hear and respond. Elias, who had first seen the lights, whispered, "They are protecting us, really protecting us." As dawn approached, the city remained in chaos, but St. Helena Shelter was untouched. The glow from the figure faded slowly with the rising sun, leaving a sense of calm and safety in its wake. For the first time in weeks, the children felt secure. Sister Maria smiled, tears streaming down her face, realizing that they had survived the night entirely unscathed. And far beyond the shelter, the militia would remember that night not as a battle, but as an encounter with something they could never explain or challenge. As the first light of dawn crept over the ruins of the city, St. Helena Shelter was bathed in a soft golden glow. The night had passed, and remarkably, not a single child had been harmed. Sister Maria moved among them, checking each one, brushing hair from tear-streaked faces and whispering words of reassurance. The fear that had gripped their hearts for so long was slowly replaced by awe. Elias, the boy who had first seen the mysterious lights, stood near the window, eyes wide with disbelief. "They were real," he murmured. "The angels, they were real." The other children nodded, still shaking but filled with a strange, inexplicable hope. Sister Maria hugged them tightly, realizing that what had protected them was something far beyond human understanding. The news of the miraculous event spread quickly. Word reached international aid workers and journalists. 27 children had survived a direct encounter with a ruthless militia, untouched and unharmed. Witnesses described glowing figures, bright lights, and an overwhelming sense of protection that had driven the attackers away. Experts and skeptics alike could not explain what had happened, yet every account from the shelter aligned perfectly. In the days that followed, Sister Maria and the children were relocated to a safer zone. Aid agencies ensured they had enough food, water, and medical care. But beyond physical safety, the experience left a lasting mark on everyone who had witnessed it. The children began to speak more openly about what they had seen, the glowing figures, the warmth that filled the shelter, the whispers of reassurance that had comforted them. Even those who had once struggled to believe in anything beyond the tangible began to feel a renewed sense of faith. Khalid Rahman and his militia never returned to the area. Soldiers who had been part of the attack spoke in hushed tones about seeing unexplainable lights and figures in the darkness, something that had terrified even the most hardened fighters. Though many refused to admit it publicly, the story of St. Helena Shelter became a whispered legend among the local militia, a night when divine protection had intervened. Years later, the children would grow up remembering that night as a turning point in their lives. Some became teachers, doctors, and aid workers themselves, inspired to help others because they knew firsthand the power of hope and faith. Sister Maria, still working tirelessly with displaced children, often said, "That night wasn't just about survival. It was about showing that even in the darkest places, miracles can happen." St. Helena Shelter remained a symbol of courage, faith, and the unexplainable protection that had saved 27 children from the horrors of war. For those who were there, the memory of glowing angels guarding them would never fade, a testament to the mysterious ways in which hope and the divine can touch the world.